What, or indeed where, you might well ask, is this so-called fifth province of the title? Now, just in case your thinking leads you to say, it must be in Ireland. Let us, first of all, remind ourselves that there are only 4 provinces in Ireland. The province of Ulster, the province of Munster, the province of Leinster, and the province of Connacht. 4. However, if you translate those provincial titles into Irish, the Gaelic language of the country, you get Cuaige Allah, Cuaige Muan, Cuaige Lion, and Cuaige Connacht, 4 again. However, it's not quite as simple as that. You see, the word Cuaige translates not as province, but as 1/5. A division of 5. So we Irish, bless us, in our own language, refer to 4 as if it were really 5. How Irish is that? But to be fair to us, there once upon a time was a division of land in Ireland that constituted a 5th province. It was created by the Milesian king, a fellow by the name of Dónal the Acceptable. The what? Well, that's what the Irish called him because he was Welsh. And he was High King of Ireland. So what happened was, after the Norman invasion in the 12th century, all of the provinces were disbanded, including the 5th province, and it disappeared forever. The territory then became known as the Pale. No more 5th province. However, throughout the writings of Irish poets, you will find references to a 5th province that is not extinct, but is in fact very much in existence. Now, this reminds me of the story of the elderly woman of the west of Ireland who was asked if she believed in the fairies. And she replied, I don't, but you know, they're there all the same. And so it is with the 5th province. We can choose to believe in its existence or not. Now, I thought, here, look, if the poets of Ireland presume to know something about this place, perhaps I ought to ask them to be my guides on a journey to its unknown location. So I did. I asked them, and they graciously accepted the invitation and agreed to guide me. In fact, they even gave me the roadmap for the journey. So we're ready to set off, but before we do, just a few helpful definitions. First of all, since we're going to be dealing with the work of poets, let us ask, what is a poet? Well, none other than William Butler Yeats himself said, everyone is a poet if you scratch them deeply enough, but the Irish are poets without scratching at all. So if you're Irish or can identify yourself as Irish by extraction, no need to scratch. If not, take a moment and have a discreet little scratch. Nobody will notice. All done? Good. Now we can all join together and relax in poetic company. Secondly, what is poetry? The great poet Hugh MacDiarmid defined it as human existence come to life. Human existence come to life. And poems. How shall we relate to poems this evening on our journey? Brendan Kennelly, Professor of English at Trinity College in Dublin, giant among Irish and world poets, defined poems as such. Poems are stories, he said. Stories that float in the air, drifting like life-giving forces, drifting as if choosing a mind or an imagination to light on and animate. So, with the nature of poets, poems, and poetry in mind, we can commence our journey. We begin very gently at a time of childhood. The scene is a remote farmhouse in County Wicklow, and dawn is breaking. The cock crows in the morning yard, banishing all night fears. No person who has ever woken to the crowing of a familiar cock can know how tender that cry is evermore, stirring the child out into the fresh fingers of sunlight, into the ever-widening armfuls of sunlight. How stray the child looks in the yard, bare feet on the old packstones in the clay. All his people have come out before him in their own vanished times, as small as him, surrounded by the quiet byres just waking now, the noses of the calves wet in the closed dark, the sitting hens on the coop, anxious to be released, out, away from the night fear of foxes, that they may lay their eggs beyond finding in the hay shed and the hawthorn bushes. Only the boy knows their terrible tricks. He inserts an arm into the known places, feels the warm eggs, smells them happily in his brown palms, then searches out the newest places of the hens in the deepest bowers of the straw. He carries them back to his mama, folded in his gansey, with the glow of pride about him, as big as the sun. And while the eggs are boiling or set aside carefully for the cake, he goes back out into the yard again and tries to read the story of the day in the huge pages of the clouds. And he sees the milking cow being driven up onto the top field, where the summer grass is rich and moist. And how well he knows the wild garden there of meadowsweet, where the dragonfly is hard as pencil. And the boy's mama is calling him, and he goes. And there is no greater morning, no morning in his life of greater importance. Quite a captivating start to our journey there, from the pen of Sebastian Barry, from his play The Steward of Christendom. Sebastian Barry, of whom one of his peers has said he writes with the pen of an angel. Patrick Kavanagh, genius poet of County Monaghan, incidentally my mother's county, keeps us now, holds us gently in that space of magic and myth. And of course, here in his story, the magic is accentuated and intensified by the particular character of the season. Patrick Kavanagh's A Christmas Childhood. One side of the potato pits was white with frost. How wonderful that was! How wonderful! And when we put our ear to the paling post, the music that came out was magical. The light between the ricks of hay and straw was a hole in heaven's gable. An apple tree with its December glinting fruit we saw. Now and then I can remember something of the gay garden that was childhood's. The tracks of cattle to a drinking place. A green stone turned sideways in a ditch or any common sight, the transfigured face of a beauty that the world did not touch. My father played the melodeon outside at our gate. There were stars in the morning east, and they danced to his music. Across the wild bogs his melodeon called to lemons and callums. As I pulled on my trousers in a hurry, I knew some strange thing had happened. Outside in the cowhouse, my mother made the music of milking. The light of her stable lamp was a star, and the frost of Bethlehem made it twinkle. A water hen screeched in the bog. Mass-going feet crunched the wafer ice on the potholes. Somebody wistfully twisted a bellows wheel. My child poet picked out the letters on the grey stone in silver. The magic of a Christmas townland, the winking glitter of a frosty dawn. Cassiopeia was over Cassidy's hanging hill. I looked, and 3 whin bushes rode across the horizon. The 3 wise kings. An old man passing said, "Can't he make it talk, the melodeon?" I hid in the doorway and tightened the belt of my box-pleated coat. I nicked 6 nicks on the doorpost with my penknife's big blade. There was a little one for cutting tobacco. And I was 6 Christmases of age. My father played the melodeon, my mother milked the cows, and I had a prayer like a white rose pinned on the Virgin Mary's blouse. Each one of us experienced the next big adventure in life, that of going to school. Stepping out bravely, well, or maybe not so bravely as in my case, beyond the familiar relationships of hearth and home, we entered the new world of the classroom and the teacher. Before we leave the age of innocence and wonder, a few words from one of Ireland's most noble and sensitive poets, Oliver Goldsmith, as he invites us inside the classroom of 250 years ago. I seriously doubt whether this school would ever survive an Ofsted inspection. However, we may thereby have lost something. From his exquisite epic poem, The Deserted Village, beside yon straggling fence that skirts the way, with blossomed firs unprofitably gay, there in his noisy mansion, skilled to rule, the village master taught his little school. A man severe he was, and stern to view. I knew him well, and every truant knew. Well had the boding tremblers learned to trace the day's disasters in his morning face. Full well they laughed with counterfeited glee at all his jokes, for many a joke had he. Full well the busy whisper circling round conveyed the dismal tidings when he frowned. Yet he was kind, or if severe in aught, the love he bore to learning was in fault. The village all declared how much he knew. 'Twas certain he could write and cipher too. Lands he could measure, terms and tides presage, and even the story ran that he could gauge. In arguing too, the parson owned his skill, for e'en though vanquished, he could argue still, while words of learned length and thundering sound amazed the gazing rustics ranged round. And still they gazed, and still the wonder grew, that one small head could carry all he knew. Dear Goldsmith, whose elegant statue graces the front entrance to Trinity College in Dublin, who was championed by the great lexicographer, Dr. Johnson, during his time in literary London, and who is, of course, commemorated in Poets' Corner in Westminster Abbey, wrote of himself, "I never took anything out of Ireland except my brogue and my blunders." Well, I could say that myself. But I didn't. To get an idea of where his bigness of heart and generosity of spirit comes from, let us pay a quick visit to his family home. His father was the parson at Lissoy, a little hamlet about 25 miles from where I was born and grew up in Ireland. Near yonder copse, where once the garden smiled, and still where many a garden flower grows wild, there where a few torn trees the place disclose, the village preacher's modest mansion rose. Unpractised he to fawn or seek for power by doctrines fashioned to the varying hour, far greater aims his heart had learned to prize, more skilled to raise the wretched than to rise. His house was known to all the vagrant train. He chid their wanderings, but relieved their pain. The long-remembered beggar was his guest, whose beard, descending, swept his aged breast. The ruined spendthrift, now no longer proud, claimed kindred there, and had his claim allowed. The broken soldier, kindly bade to stay, sat by his fire and talked the night away. Wept o'er his wounds are tales of sorrow done, shouldered his crutch and showed how fields were won. Pleased with his guests, the good man learned to glow, and quite forgot their vices in their woe. Careless their merits or their faults to scan, his pity gave ere charity began. When I was a scholar at school, and I use the word scholar rather loosely, I recall being wrapped in a real state of wonder on reading for the first time the refrain from Yeats's poem Easter 1916, which goes, "All changed, changed utterly. A terrible beauty is born." What, I ask myself, would the world look like changed utterly? What would a terrible beauty look like if you came across one? Now, as if in answer to these imponderable questions, the 60s happened. Old joke coming up now. Remember the 60s? They say that if you can, you were not there. Old jokes, don't you just love them? Anyhow, maybe I wasn't there because there are some things I can remember from the 60s. The soundtrack to the decade was, of course, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. In Ireland, there was Sean O'Riordan and Kiltori Cualan reviving the Irish traditional music scene. There was the time when I played Hamlet, aged 18. There was playing basketball on my school team. And of course, going to Connemara, to summer school, to learn the Irish language in the holidays. Oh, learning the language was great. And the girls on the course were wonderful. So I went back every year. There was, of course, the moment when one heard of the horrendous assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. There was the stilling event of the death of Pope John XXIII, a truly humble and inspiring figure, the people's Pope. And then, I can recall being present during the All-Ireland Fleadh Cheoil, the nationwide festival of traditional music, which was held that year, 1963, in my hometown of Mullingar. Now, Mullingar, in those days, was a sleepy-ish, quiet, midland market town with a population of about 10,000 God-fearing people. It was the capital of County Westmeath and an important rail junction, indeed. In the days before speed limits on the roads were even dreamed of, the approach roads to Mullingar carried large signs at the roadside, huge yellow back placards with black capital letters that read, "Mullingar, go slow." My mother's comment was that the townspeople had been taking the advice personally for years. On Whit Weekend, which was the weekend of the Fleadh in 1963, the population of that sleepy town swelled from 10,000 to almost 250,000 people. I couldn't begin to recount for you the events that I witnessed that weekend. We'd be here all night. However, we'll leave that to John Montague, a sterling among the Irish poets, who was in town that weekend and leaves us this crystal clear snapshot. His title for the event, "The Siege of Mullingar." At the Fleadh Cheoil in Mullingar, there were two sounds: the breaking of glass and the background pulse of music. Young girls roamed the streets with eager faces, pushing for men. Bottles in hand, they rowed out for a song. Puritan Ireland's dead and gone, a myth of O'Connor and O'Faolain. In the early morning, the lovers lay on both sides of the canal, listening on Sony transistors to the agony of Pope John. Yet it didn't seem strange or blasphemous, this ground base of death and resurrection, as we strolled along. Puritan Ireland's dead and gone, a myth of O'Connor and O'Faolain. Farther on, breasting the wind waves of the deserted grain harbour, we saw a pair, a cob and his pen, most nobly linked. Everything then in our casual morning vision seemed to flow in one direction. Line simple as a song. Puritan Ireland's dead and gone. A myth of O'Connor and O'Foylon. To have been caught up, as I was, in that interface between committed revelers outnumbering the stunned natives was like traveling in time. It certainly echoed Yeats's refrain. All had changed utterly, and a terrible beauty was born. And here it was, being birthed on my childhood doorstep, calling into question the relationship between the institutions of stable nationhood and my own inner life that struggled to make some sense of the world. Bob Dylan sang, "The times they are a-changin'." Too right, Bob. The change had just come home, bringing with it a host of challenges and questions. And Dylan didn't help by then singing that the answer is blowing in the wind. Questions and challenges in abundance for those of us growing up in Ireland at the time. But, as luck would have it, there was one man who was in the right place at the right time to catch that fresh breeze, answer-laden. His name was Sean Dunn, and he was a sensitive writer and explorer of life taken from us all too soon, but his life and work are commemorated in an annual festival in his native Wexford. From his autobiographical work, The Road to Silence, he leaves us this remarkable story. At some point, I was told that it was a mortal sin to enter a Protestant church. Now, this made the exterior of St. Andrew's seem even darker still. The church had a forbidding, if lyric, Englishness to it. I thought of the people who attended that church as having names like Cecil and Hilda and Algernon. Whereas those of us who attended our church up on the hill had plain names like Michael, Mary, and Anne. By the time I reached my teens, the Protestant church was simply the sum of those facts. When I passed it on the bus from Waterford, I would look through the window and see Tommy Ivory working away behind the old stone wall. I had no desire to enter it. There was not, after all, any point in pushing myself to the front of the queue at the gates of hell. Yet the day did come when I entered the Protestant church. There was a singer in our village by the name of Willie Watt. And one year in the early 70s, it was announced that he was to sing at a special harvest festival in St. Andrews. Now, I had heard old records of his singing, and I liked it. And I was anxious to hear him in person. I was no longer a boy, but neither was I a man. And the desire to see the inside of the Protestant church and hear the singing of Willie Watt soon became as important for my intellectual development as the growth of hairs on my chin had been for my physical growth. Accordingly, On the day of the concert, I entered the church. I made my way to a pew. I felt self-conscious in the dark blazer of my Catholic school. I felt a mix of unease and excitement. My grandmother's strictures on sin were becoming less significant by the second. I had a good look around. I noticed the minister in his strange rig-out, to borrow one of my grandmother's words. I noticed the cushions and the soft kneelers. I noticed the way men and women bowed their heads deeply in prayer. Try as I might, I could not find a single horn sprouting from any of their heads, and their feet seemed sensibly shod, with not a cloven hoof in sight. The walls were free of statues, but they were not free of memorials. Marble and limestone carried the names of local men, some of whom were members of the gentry, who had fought in the British Army and had been in the Boer War or on other battlefields far from our seaside village. Now, up until then, I had known of these conflicts only from reading my weekly imported comics, The Hotspur and Victor. Now, like the accent of the minister and the names on the wall, they produced a visceral immediacy that complicated everything. Irish nationalism ran deep in my family. My grandfather had fought in the 20s in the War of Independence, and like any schoolchild in the 1960s, I was familiar with the course of Irish history. The world of Gallipoli and the Somme was very strange to me, but the worlds of Aughrim and Clontarf were very immediate. As I stood there in that small church, I felt as if I was surrounded by something that was more than just a religious difference. It was social, political, colonial. It was two pairs of eyes that looked in opposite directions and never met. I was too young to put all this into words at the time. I felt as if I was inhabiting the other side of a question, whereas before I had simply lived with a cozy answer. Taking this aspect of religion into account, I now realize how sectarian I was in a country where sectarianism kills, and how, with the cozy collusion of community, I had made ogres of those who had fought with my ancestors, but with whom I had no reason to quarrel. On the day that I entered St. Andrew's Church, a gap in me opened up, and a great deal of light was let in. In religious terms, yes, I was confused. In social terms, that light removed a threat and offered an illumination. That light certainly did its job for Sean Dunn. And indeed, it has continued to do its job right throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s, those troubled years when Ireland was torn apart. It lit the way for all the architects of the peace process, which culminated, of course, in the Good Friday Agreement, a peace treaty which is the envy of the world, but which we must not, in all its fragility, ever take for granted. The Light, of course, has a sense of humour, and it can even afford us the space and the distance to take a look at the old historic relationship between the Britain of Empire and what Miles Nargothelin called the plain people of Ireland, fellows like myself. Percy French, master of heartfelt satire, gives us this account of a conversation that was held between Queen Victoria and Lord Zetland. Now, Lord Zetland was about to depart for Ireland to take up his post as Lord Lieutenant of Ireland. Queen Victoria had visited Ireland many times, and she was very keen that his lordship should succeed in his posting. And so she summoned him for a top-level diplomatic briefing at Buckingham Palace. Now, we've all heard of WikiLeaks, and we think it's something very modern. But no, the Irish were doing it 100 years ago. Here, according to Percy French, is the Queen's advice to Lord Zetland, as overheard and reported here by one Larry Flynn, a Corkman, who rejoiced in the distinguished job title of Deputy Under Assistant Waiter at Buckingham Palace. Queen's advice, according to Larry Flynn. "See here, me lord," says she. "You'll find it hard," says she, "to play your card," says she, "so I'll give you the tip," says she, "before you trip," says she. "Take your mackintoshes," says she, "and your old galoshes," says she, "for 'tis raining there," says she, "if it rains anywhere," says she. "You'll be met with ovations," says she, "and grand orations," says she. "So have your replies," says she, "all cut and dry," says she. "Remark out loud," says she, "you're awful proud," says she, "at being sent," says she, "to represent," says she, "this glorious land," says she. "You understand?" says she. "Well, I'm not very clever," says he, "but I'll do me endeavour," says he. "Take a party down," says she, "to the races at Punch's Town," says she, "and give a ball," says she, "in St. Patrick's Hall," says she. "Or maybe two," says she, "for one mightn't do," says she, "and them from Merrion Square," says she, "might not care," says she, "for to be going to supper," says she, "with Baggott's Street upper," says she. "Then open bazaars," says she. "Well, bless me stars," says he, "that's not much fun," says he, "when all's said and done," says he. "Hold on a store," says she, "there's a trifle more," says she. "You know, I presume," says she, "at the drawing room," says she, "there's many a miss," says she, "you'll have to kiss," says she. "Oh, that's not so bad," says he. "Well, you're the lad," says she. "Oh, no, I mean for to say," says he, in a fatherly way, says he, "Go home, you old sinner," says she, "I must order me dinner," says she. "Remember and steer," says she, "uncommonly clear," says she. "Oh, yes, I know what you mean," says he, "betwixt and between," says he, "up with the green," says he, "and God save the Queen," says she. It was at this point on our journey that the poets intervened and whispered in my ear a suggestion that we should visit a particular area of human life, that of our intimate relationship with another person of whichever gender. Now, this is a phenomenal event. Something happens, and it enables what we call the flowering of love to occur between two people. And so each one of us is called to participate with courage, with wholeheartedness, with strength in adversity in this domain of relationship. But what if the flowering is nipped in the bud, as happens in the story of Brídín Vési? This poem, by an unknown author, was written in original Irish in the 18th century and is here translated. You must hear the poem being spoken by a man much, much younger than I. I would marry Brídín Vési without shoe or petticoat, a comb, a cloak or dowry, or even one clean shift. And I would make novena or imitate the hermits who spend their lives in fasting, all for a Christmas gift. Oh, cheek, like dogwood fruiting, oh, cuckoo of the mountain, I would send darkness packing if you would rise and go against the ban of clergy and the sour lips of your parents, and take me at an altar stone, in spite of all Mayo. That was the sullen morning they told the cruel story, how, scorning word or token, you rose and went away. 'Twas then my hands remembered, my ears still heard you calling, I smelt the gorse and heather where first we went to play. What could they know who named you, of jug and bed and table, hours slipping through our fingers, time banished from the room? Or what of all the secrets we knew among the rushes when cuckoos brightened against the moon? You are my first and last song, the harp that lilts my fingers, your lips like frozen honey, eyes like the mountain pool, shaped like the reek your breast is, whiter than milk from Neffin, and he who never saw you has lived and died a fool. Oh, gone across the Mering, dividing hope from sadness, what happy townland holds you? In what country do you reign? In spite of all the grinning lads at corner and in hay barn, I'll search all Ireland over and bring you home again. Heartbreak, heartache, longing, rivalry, jealousy, sadness, anger, joy, the entire range of human emotions are called into play by the affairs of the heart. A wrong step in any direction in such relationship can summon up feelings of great pride and passion, as F.R. Higgins demonstrates for us in his story, of a woman scorned, a tinker's woman. I'll throw no sorrowful hair at her, no tears for you, MacDara, for pride of beauty takes no slur when fierce of limb, MacDara. You thought my body's shine grew dusk beside that girl you took from Lusk. Yet who but a fool would pluck the husk and leave the fruit to wither? I now recall when from the gorse I saw you swim sea water. Stark naked I went on a tinker's horse down to the morning water, and into the green sea I took my ride, bare-backed, horse swimming to your side. And who but a fool would rob the tide and throw away the salmon? Now, I know, you wrongly thought you loved me then, MacDara, when, peeled to the waist for me, you fought some mountainy fella, MacDara. And there, on wet grass, and stripped to my teeth, I seemed like a sword of light at your feet. Then who but a fool would keep the sheath and leave the sword unhandled? So no, I'll throw no curse before your lean ways with young women, for I'm too ripe in the old son's lore to envy slips of women. And take that girlish slip that went to whet your taste last night in my tent. For who but a fool would look for scent along a budless bramble? For me, at any rate, it would be impossible to depart from a visit to the love poetry of Ireland without including that magnificent poem of love and transformation by William Butler Yeats. I refer, of course, to the Song of Wandering Aengus. I went out to the hazel wood because a fire was on my head, and cut and peeled a hazel wand, and hooked a berry to a thread. And when white moths were on the wing, and moth-like stars were flickering out, I cast the berry in a stream, and caught a little silver trout. When I had laid it on the floor, I went to blow the fire aflame, but something rustled on the floor, and someone called me by my name. It had become a glimmering girl with apple blossom in her hair, who called me by my name and ran and faded through the brightening air. Though I am old with wandering through hollow lands and hilly lands, I will find out where she is gone, and kiss her lips, and take her hands, and walk among long dappled grass, and pluck till time and times are done the silver apples of the moon the golden apples of the sun. Time now for a diversion on our journey to the 5th province. We're going to visit each one of the 4 provinces before we can proceed to the 5th. What we're going to get is a flavour of the character of each one of those provinces. And our guide is, once again, as at Buckingham Palace, the irrepressible Percy French. Percy French graduated from Trinity College Dublin as an engineer, took up his first job in County Cavan with the distinguished title of Inspector of Drains. He soon gave that up and toured Ireland for years and years with his songs and sketches, his wonderful popular variety show. So he knew every part of the country, and he revelled in making and sustaining friendships wherever he went. Here is his story of the 4 Farrellys. In a small hotel in London, I was sitting down to dine when the waiter brought the register and asked me if I'd sign. And as I signed, I saw a name that set my heart astir. A certain Francis Farrelly had signed the register. I knew a lot of Farrellys, and out of all that crew, I kept on sort of wondering, which Farrelly are you? And when I'd finished dinner, I sat back in my chair, going round my native land to find which Farrelly you were. Were you that Francis Farrelly I met beyond Kenmare, who told me that when Ireland fought, the odds was never fair? If Cromwell had met Sarsfield or met Owen Roe O'Neill, 'tis not to Mr. Gladstone we'd be looking for repeal. We'd have Ireland for the Irish, not a Saxon to be seen, and only Gaelic spoken in the Parliament on College Green. Told me landlords are the devil, their agents 10 times worse, and every sort of government for Ireland is a curse. If you're that Francis Farrelly, your dreams have not come true. Still, Sláinte Francine, for I like a man like you. Or were you that Francis Farrelly that often used to say he'd like to blow them papishes from Derry's walls away? The boy that used to bother me the Orange Lodge to join, and thought that history started with the Battle of the Boyne. Now, I was not all with you, Francis, and the Pope is not my friend, but I hope, poor man, he'll die without that bloody end. And when you quit from care yourself and go to kingdom come, it's no use teaching you the harp, you'll play the orange drum. But, oh man, you are a fighter. Of that I have no doubt, for I seen you in Belfast one night when the Antrim Road was out. And many's the time that evening I thought that you were dead, the way them papish paving stones was hopping off your head. Oh, if you're that Francis Farrelly that came from North Tyrone, here's looking to you, Francis, but do leave the Pope alone. Or were you that Francis Farrelly who, in my college days, for strolling on the Kingstown pier, had such a curious craze? Do you mind them lovely sisters, the blonde and the brunette? I know I've not forgotten, and I'm sure you don't forget. That picnic at the Dargle and the other at the Scalp. How my heart was palpitating. Hers wasn't, not a palp. Someone said you married money and maybe you were wise, but the gold you loved was in her hair and the diamonds in her eyes. So I like to think you married her and that you're with her yet. 'Twas some militia officer that married the brunette, but the blonde one always loved you, and I know you loved her too. So me blessings on you, Francis, and the blue sky over you. Or were you the Francis Farrelly I met so long ago in the bog below Belmullet in the county of Mayo? That long-legged, freckled Francis with the deep-set, wistful eyes that seemed to take their colours from the ever-changing skies, that put his flute together as I sketched a distant scene and played me Planxty Riley and the Wakes of Inishkeen. That told me in the autumn he'd be sailing to the west to try to make his fortune and send money to the rest. And would I draw a picture of the place where he was born, he'd hang it up and look at it and not feel so forlorn. And when I'd finished painting, you got up from where you sat and said, "Well, you're the devil." And I can't say more than that. Oh, if you're that Francis Farrelly, your fortune may be small, but I'm thinking, Francis, that I love you best of all. And I never will forget you, though it's years and years ago, in the bog below Belmullet, in the county of Mayo. Percy French, writing in an age of relative innocence about 100 years ago, about an Ireland that has completely disappeared. It has, of course, in recent times been replaced by the Ireland of the Celtic tiger, forced ultimately to confront the spectre of bankruptcy, not only fiscally, but spiritually as well. Fast forward now to the present century, and poet, playwright, and professor Brendan Kennelly gives us the story of Ace de Horner, actually Brendan's alter ego, a blind, recently blind, ne'er-do-well poet. And on this odyssey that Ace de Horner takes through the streets of Dublin, We see him surrounded by this desolate, unforgiving landscape with which he identifies. And on his journey, he grapples with the thought of who he himself might be. This is from Brendan's epic poem. It occupies an entire volume, in fact, about that thick, which rejoices in the title, Poetry, My Arse. I believe Wimbledon Books has it in stock. Just walk in and say, can I have poetry? My arse. And they'll find it for you. This, from Brendan Kennelly, the Song of Ace de Horner. I am the wind on the Liffey. I am the youngster fleeing the policeman on O'Connell Bridge. I am the newest rumour on the streets of Dublin. Take me to bed. Spread me with the relish of prophecy. Taste me like a juicy honeymoon. But above all, add to me. Add to me like a parody of the myth you were born to hunger for. I am the child's cry in the childminder's ear. Where on earth are my father and mother? I am river, canal, sea, street, scandal, piss-taker, starving cat, graffiti, liffey rat, white plastic bag in wild flight over Dublin. I am a freezing midnight parking lot. I am gas. Cheap gas, might explode. I am the Jets, white line, perfect in the raped sky. I am the way out. I am a guide bridge in a city hardly knowing it is losing its heart. I am a BA honours, seeking business in Europe. I am halfway to anywhere. I am short steps on a long journey. I am as apt a practitioner of pollution as anyone in this particular country. I am the lies of killers on television, in public places, the obscene plausibility on their faces. I am blindness itself. I can see that. I am the question that I fear to answer. Well, of course, we can all empathise with Ace de Horner as he struggles with that question of who he might possibly be. To help us, visionary poet Michael Hartnett takes us by the hand and invites us to consider a new possibility of being in the world. There will be a talking of lovely things. There will be a cognizance of the seasons. There will be men who know the flight of birds. In new days, there will be love for women. We will walk the balance of artistry, and things will have a middle and an end, and be loved because being beautiful. Who, in a walk, will find a lasting vase depicting dance and hold it in his hands and sell it then? No man on the new earth will barter with malice or make of stone a hollow riddle, for art will be art. the freak, the rare, no longer commonplace. There will be a going back to the laws. Of course, the laws to which Michael Hartnett refers are not enshrined in some body of man-made legislation. He's pointing rather to an ancestral connection that we have to life in its integrity. He has just taken us to a most unusual place, called us to look beyond our everyday experience of ourselves and of our lives. With that, and with our chorus in the background. Thank you, lads. We are on the threshold of the 5th province. Somebody should let them know. In order to enter in there, we must simply be willing to part the veils of time and step back 2,500 years to when the very first poem ever recorded in Northern Europe was spoken in Ireland. The poet was Aberdeen Gluengal, leader of the Milesian people recently arrived in Ireland, and he speaks with clear and passionate conviction about the interconnectedness of all creation. The Song of Aberdeen. I am a breeze that blows over the seas. I am a wave of the ocean. I am a hawk on a cliff. I am fair among flowers. I am the oak tree and the lightning that splits it. I am as gods in the power of transformation. I am a shining tear of the sun. I descend in tears like dew. I lie glistening. I am a lake on the plain. I am a salmon in the pool. I am a ravening boar on the rocks. I am the death point of the battle spear. I am the shield of every head. I am the womb of every dream. I am the tomb of every hope. I am a word of science. Whither shall I lead you? Shall we debate in valley or on peak? Where else shall we dwell but in this fertile land in peace? Aberdeen, Glúingal, calling up a land in which people might dwell in their creativity and peace. But of course, he's not referring really to a piece of territory. He's really pointing to a space in the heart in which we can experience ourselves in all of our poetic nature, in all of our authenticity, in all of our dreamlike existence. Now, I like to think of that space as the fifth province. I have a feeling we have arrived. Thank you for joining me on the journey. And yet, we didn't go anywhere. Each one of us has that space right here. William Butler Yeats was very specific in his drawing the picture of it. And I would invite you to hear this, our last poem, not as a desire to run away and be somewhere else, but as an affirmation of who we are right here in the present. I will arise and go now, and go to Innisfree, and a small cabin build there of clay and wattles made. 9 bean rows will I have there, and a hive for the honey bee, and live alone in the bee-loud glade. And I shall have some peace there, for peace comes dropping slow, dropping from the vales of the morning to where the crickets sing. There midnight's all a glimmer, and noon a purple glow, and evening full of the linnet's wings. And I will arise and go now, for always, night and day, I hear lake water lapping with low sounds by the shore. And as I stand on the roadway or on the pavement's grey, I hear it in the deep heart's core. The creative heart of the universe is not out there somewhere. It is carried in everyone,